guys, welcome back to G Chats with your host G. We are, as always, joined right here in the G spot. I'm so excited for today's episode because it is a Q&A, and this is usually you guys your favorites. You guys love Q&As. We did get a lot of inquiries, and some of you guys were more so like storytelling, like your experience, and then wanted my feedback. I broke it up just for the sake of this video, your information, like everything that some of you gave us, into questions, because some of you asked like 4 questions in one. So I kind of broke up. There was a lot of duplicates as well. I have a total of 20 questions on the list. I'm going to try my best to get through all of them. I'm going to try to talk fast because I want to get through all of the questions. So I don't want to keep this intro super long. We're just going to get started right away. So without further ado, let's jump into this. So number 1 says, can you take probiotics while on antibiotics? And this is such a common question. The answer is yes. You just want to make sure you space it out. So if you are, for the most part, I feel like most people who are on antibiotics for bacterial vaginosis or yeast infection, more times than not, they are prescribed a dose in the morning and a dose at night. And so if you are prescribed morning and PM doses, you want to take your probiotics midday. If you were to take the probiotics at night or in the morning with your antibiotics, the antibiotics and the probiotics entering the gut at the exact same time will likely cause the antibiotics to fight off that good bacteria. So ideally, you want to take it at least 2 to 3 hours after your antibiotics or 2 to 3 hours before your antibiotics. So I would say if you're doing like a 8 a.m., 8 p.m. kind of thing, you can take your probiotics anywhere from like noon to 1 p.m. and you should be okay. Alternatively, I do recommend to some people that you could do like 2 hours after the 8 a.m. So you could do like 10 a.m., but then you can also take it at like 10 p.m., your probiotics, and double dose. So for example, our probiotics is a 1-month supply. You're supposed to take 2 pills every single day, and you take the pills together. If you wanted to double up while you're on antibiotics with 4 pills a day and do like 2 hours after the first dose of antibiotics and then 2 more pills 2 hours before your second dose of antibiotics, you could do that. I only recommend double dosing while you're on antibiotics just because there still is some chance that the probiotics will die off from the broad spectrum effects of the antibiotics. So if you wanted to double dose during this time, you can make sure you speak with your doctor. That would be 100 billion CFUs. So I think that it is reasonable to do so while you are on antibiotics, but you would want to stop as soon as you finish. But the answer is yes. You just have to be strategic about it. Question 2 says, why do I keep getting BV after sex even if I use protection? And the first thing that goes to my mind is that you have an infection that never fully went away due to something known as a biofilm. Biofilms are actually why so many women feel that even when they use protection and even when they abstain from sex and then they do have sex, why they feel like it's triggered is because biofilms basically protect the bacteria with a sticky, slimy coating. It's this protective film over the bacteria. And what happens is when penetration and friction happens against this biofilm, it can start to release compounds. Some of these compounds include volatile organic compounds, VOCs, which is actually what's responsible for the odor when these volatile organic compounds are released. So if you have a strong odor after sex, even with protection, it's probably because the biofilm has now had friction against it, even with protection, that these compounds were now released and creating this odor. And in releasing this odor, you can release other compounds that can cause itchiness, maybe even burning. And so this will cause, if you will, a flare up, but it's essentially a persistent infection that is being protected by a biofilm. So I would say, and I think there's more questions about biofilms, but I would say to really focus on completely eradicating the infection through something like a biofilm disruptor, disrupting the biofilm, taking your antibiotics and restoring with probiotics. That way, this issue is not a thing. Question 3 says, can you get a yeast infection from sugar? The simple answer is no. Sugar doesn't just trigger a yeast infection, or at least it shouldn't. If you are someone who feels that every time you have a can of soda or you eat ice cream, suddenly you have a yeast infection, there's something deeper that's happening here. And it could be that you are feeding the good bacteria, the bad bacteria, the yeast. You could be feeding things that you don't want to be feeding with sugar, but it doesn't necessarily trigger yeast to overgrow overnight. What's probably happening is the yeast is being fed, whether there's a small microbial amount, and if you don't have enough good bacteria in your vagina, even feeding the yeast a little bit can create some itchiness, some rawness, some redness. You might have some uncomfortable symptoms, and it all comes back to poor diet. So of course, too much sugar is not good for your body. Number 1, it's not good for your gut health, which in turn affects your vaginal health. Number 2, it's not good for your hormones. And number 3, it's not good for your blood sugar, which in turn affects the rest of your hormones. And number 4, it's not good for good bacteria. Good bacteria doesn't want too much sugar. And if you are consuming too much sugar, you might not be giving the good bacteria the nutrients it needs, but you are feeding the bad bacteria. So you want to make sure that you are limiting your sugar intake, but sugar isn't the devil. It's not something that if you drink a can of soda, you should end up with a yeast infection. If you are. Now, if that's the only connection here where you're consuming sugar and then the next day you have a yeast infection, we need to focus on correcting your gut health and then correcting the vaginal microbiome. Those are going to be the 2 key things. If that is something that's happening, that to me points to there is a lot going on with the gut to vagina axis if consuming sugar is the thing that triggers your yeast infection. So normally that's not supposed to happen where consuming sugar suddenly causes a problem. If it is because of your gut, and you need to address gut health, and you can do that with our new product, Gut Revival, but addressing gut health alongside vaginal microbiome health will be the key. Number 4, what's the difference between BV and a yeast infection? So let's talk about it. Bacterial vaginosis is basically in its name, bacteria. Now, the bacteria that causes bacterial vaginosis is usually anaerobic bacteria, or almost always anaerobic bacteria. And it is when there's an overgrowth of this anaerobic bacteria. Now, this overgrowth of anaerobic bacteria 99.9% of the time, if not 100% of the time, occurs because there's no good bacteria in the vagina. So nobody who has BV has this overgrowth of bad bacteria with a lot of good bacteria. No. If you are having BV, it is directly associated with the deficiency of good bacteria. So you don't have good bacteria in the vagina, or you have a little bit of good bacteria in the vagina, but you mainly now have this overgrowth of bad bacteria. But this overgrowth is due to the deficiency of good bacteria. So you may have lost this good bacteria for a number of reasons, and now this overgrowth has now been triggered to grow, and this bacteria has been triggered to grow, and now you have the condition bacterial vaginosis. So BV is a bacterial infection, or I don't like necessarily even using the word infection in this case, and the reason I don't is because BV pathogens, the bad guys that cause BV, they are commensal bacteria, meaning they are bacteria that normally lives in the vagina. And the reason they are able to overgrow is because there's not enough good bacteria in the vagina. And it's similar to the gut, for example. Like all of our gut microbiomes have E. coli in it. But if your gut is not healthy and there's dysbiosis, you lose diversity in the gut, there's not enough good bacteria in the gut, this E. coli that naturally lives in the vagina can overgrow when there's not enough good bacteria within the gut. And the same logic applies in this case as well, where normally Gardnerella is living in the vagina, Prevotella. There's different anaerobic pathogens that just live in the vagina and they stay at bay when lactobacillus is thriving, because lactobacillus is what's protecting you from these bad guys overgrowing. And something that's really important to remember is that the vagina is never sterile, meaning that you're never just going to have good bacteria in the vagina. You're always going to have some bad bacteria. That is normal. The vagina is not sterile. Nowhere in our body is sterile. Your urine's not sterile. Your gut's not sterile. Your hands aren't sterile, no matter how many times you wash your hands. Our bodies are not sterile. So you have good bacteria and you have bad bacteria. But bacterial vaginosis is a bacterial condition where there's an overgrowth of anaerobic bacteria. Yeast infections, on the other hand, is a fungal infection. So the yeast that causes vulvocandidiasis, which is vaginal yeast infections, is Candida albicans. This is the primary strain of yeast that causes vaginal yeast infections, but there's other Candida strains as well. But Candida is the family. So Candida is a type of fungus, and this causes a yeast infection. Now, again, similarly, yeast infections can live in the vagina, or yeast pathogens, can live in the vagina in very small amounts. And the key here is, again, they don't normally do anything if you have a dominating presence of good bacteria. But when you lose this good bacteria, whether it's from pregnancy, which a lot of people might lose good bacteria from pregnancy, or it's poor diet, or it's hormones, it's stress, anytime that you might lose this good bacteria, these things, especially with yeast infections in particular, they actually get fed through estrogen production. So that's something where, like in pregnancy, a lot of women end up having more yeast infections than the average person because their estrogen skyrockets during pregnancy. And when your estrogen is elevated, this can actually feed the yeast. And so while it might be feeding good bacteria, it could be feeding yeast as well. So you are more susceptible to yeast infections during this time, which is why it's actually super important to support your body with probiotics. But yeah, so yeast infections are a fungal infection, and bacterial vaginosis is a bacterial situation. And bacterial vaginosis is treated with antibiotics. Yeast infections are treated with antifungals. So there are two different types of infections. They stem from similar things, and the common denominator here is the deficiency of good bacteria. But there could be other reasons that someone might get a yeast infection or bacterial vaginosis. Biofilms are at play here, but those are like the core differences between the two infections. Can probiotics actually cure BV or yeast infections? So some studies say yes. Some studies show that probiotics are fully capable of eradicating bacterial vaginosis pathogens and Candida albicans, and this is due to the lactic acid production. So lactic acid actually has antimicrobial properties that have been capable of disrupting the cell wall of the bacteria and of the fungus and being able to eradicate the infection. But I want to note that this isn't something that's like widespread that we apply, that yes, probiotics treat bacterial vaginosis or yeast infections. They can be very helpful, which is why I always advise while you are taking your antibiotics or antifungal, you take your probiotics alongside. What I will say is, personally, with my business and my background as a biomedical engineer, I would never make the claim that yes, probiotics do cure either of these infections, because I don't think there's enough substantial evidence that it does. I actually think there's substantial evidence that it's more preventative. I think probiotics, the literature that we see and the literature that has been around for 50 plus years at this point, it all shows us, it's very convincing and concrete that probiotics are capable of preventing yeast infections, bacterial vaginosis, and UTIs. In terms of treating, I still err on the side of you do need antibiotics or antifungals when you're having an active infection. But with that being said, and the reason I mainly argue this is because every single research paper that has been done where it compared using antibiotics and probiotics versus just antibiotics alone for bacterial vaginosis prove that combining antibiotics and probiotics is more effective at keeping BV away than just antibiotics alone. And this further proves the point that antibiotics alone don't solve the whole problem, because the reason you got BV to begin with is because you have a deficiency of good bacteria. So you need to bring that good bacteria back into the vagina, and you do that with probiotics. The same can be applied to yeast infections. Combining antifungals with probiotics can treat the yeast infection, but also keep the yeast infection away. So I wouldn't say yes, probiotics treat it. There's evidence suggesting that it does because of the lactic acid production. And some people have success with eradicating their mild yeast infection with probiotics. But as a professional, I would say always get the actual treatment, the antibiotic or the antifungal, and combine it with probiotics if you want more evidence-based, true clinical results. Number 6 says, why do my infections always come back after treatment? And there's 2 reasons that I can think of. Number 1, did you take probiotics after your treatment, either after your antibiotic or antifungal? If you did not, then that is why it's coming back. Because again, the reason these things are coming about, and this was my story, why I kept getting UTI after UTI after UTI. My first UTI came about not only because my gut health was bad, but because my vaginal microbiome was wrecked. And that was due to the stress I was going through. I was also having a cold. I was also on my period. And if you didn't know, your immune system being weak and you being on your period, all of these things set you up to be more susceptible to losing good bacteria in your vagina. And when you lose good bacteria in your vagina, you're more susceptible to the urethra being contaminated with E. coli. And when you get your UTI, and in my case, my first UTI, I then take antibiotics for it. But I take antibiotics and that further disrupts my gut microbiome, which is allowing the E. coli in my gut to continue thriving. But I still never corrected my vaginal microbiome either. So my vaginal microbiome is still suffering. So at this point now, we have a wrecked gut microbiome and a wrecked vaginal microbiome, which is setting me up to keep getting infections. So the key, and maybe the criminal here, isn't the antibiotic itself. It's the fact that we leave out in clinical treatment that you need to take probiotics afterwards. And this is actually something that's super common with bacterial vaginosis. So BV in particular, you take metronidazole or clindamycin or some antibiotic that you aren't resistant to. You take it for your BV and you think like, okay, I'm good. I just took it. But the reason you got BV is because BV is directly classified as a deficiency of lactobacillus. So you have BV because you don't have enough good bacteria, lactobacillus, in your vagina. So then you take antibiotics to kill this overgrowth of Gardnerella and overgrowth of bad bacteria. But again, you're still here. You still don't have any of your good guys. So you bring this down, but there's still none of this being raised. And that's what you want. You want to raise this. So ideally, when we're clinically trying to treat someone, you want to bring down the bad guys, but bring back up the good guys. You can't do that if all you do is take antibiotics and kill off the bad guys. So it's really important to restore with probiotics after, and then continue taking probiotics to maintain what you restored. So that's number 1. Number 2, it could be that your treatment is failing because you are resistant to it. So a resistance or susceptibility test needs to be done. If you are taking your antibiotics or taking your antifungal and it's not working and it's just coming right back, the infection, it's probably because the infection never went away to begin with because you were resistant. And number 3, it's possible that a biofilm could be present. And a biofilm, again, protects the bacteria or even the yeast from pharmaceutical treatment, from the drug. And when this pathogen is being protected, the the pharmaceutical drug cannot penetrate through and kill off this pathogen. And so the key here is to disrupt the cell wall, the biofilm, so that now it's free. The bacteria or the yeast is free and able to actually die off from the antibiotic. So in this case, I always recommend to my customers, or recommend through social media, but my expert opinion would be use boric acid for 7 to 10 nights. And this is literally one of the only times that I recommend boric acid use, because I actually hate boric acid. Boric acid, 7 to 10 nights. And then once you're done doing that for 7 to 10 nights, start either your antibiotic or your antifungal, whichever you were prescribed given whichever infection you're having. Use your antifungal or antibiotic and take your probiotics with it. Once you're done with your antibiotics, keep taking your probiotics. Number one, step one, you disrupt the biofilm. Step two, you kill off the infection. And step three, you restore both your gut and your vaginal microbiome. So that is like the key for long-term success. And that's like the 3-step routine that I always recommend. And this is when I recommend boric acid. Is it safe to use boric acid all the time? Lots of people are abusing boric acid and using it. I see all the time on TikTok in particular, where it's like, oh, pop boric acid in before you have sex or every time you finish your period. No. I will keep this very short because I have so many videos talking about how much I hate boric acid. But boric acid is an astringent. It dries out the vaginal tissue. And when you dry out the vaginal tissue, you thin the vaginal tissue lining. And when you thin this tissue, you have dryness, you have irritation, you have atrophy, you can even have like slight micro tears. It is not good for the vagina. It is good in an instance where you have a biofilm and you need to eradicate or disrupt the biofilm to be able to take antibiotics to then be able to restore with probiotics. So boric acid is not something you should be using to freshen up, to make sure you don't smell down there, or to just like clean your vagina. No, it's drying the vaginal tissue. It's drying you out. It's thinning your vaginal tissue. The vaginal tissue is supposed to be moist, bouncy, elastic, thick. It's supposed to be all these things. And 9 times out of 10, the reason it is all of these things is because of good bacteria. But when you use boric acid, you're not only creating the opposite of all of these things, you're drying it, thinning it, all of that, but you're also killing good bacteria. A lot of people don't know this, but just because boric acid is an acid and we know that the vagina needs to be acidic, it's not the same acid that our vaginas need. The acid that our vaginas need is lactic acid from probiotics. That is the type of acid that our vaginas need, not acetic acid from apple cider vinegar, not boric acid, none of these things. It wants lactic acid from the probiotics. That's the true acid in our vaginas. So contrary to popular belief, boric acid does not balance your pH the way it's supposed to. It doesn't feed or nourish the good bacteria. It actually can kill off some of this good bacteria. It raises your vaginal pH to about a 5, and you want your pH between a 3.8 and a 4.5. So it's raising it outside of the range. It's not the ideal acidity for your vagina. The one thing that keeps it in the ideal range is lactic acid. So please do not use boric acid unless you are suspecting you have a biofilm, to which then you can create a strategic routine where you take boric acid only for 7 nights, maximum 10. And that's if you even need 10. I stick with 7 to avoid dryness and irritation. But boric acid, then antibiotics, then probiotics, like we just talked about. But seriously, boric acid is a no-no. Don't reach for it. Don't let people make you think that you need to use this to like freshen up. No, you don't. You do not. Next question says, is it normal to have discharge every day? Yes, discharge is a normal part of the female body. A lot of people, and I actually hate the word discharge, because when you think of discharge, you think of something icky, something like pus from a pimple or like a leak from a car, like something that shouldn't be happening, a malfunction, if you will. Discharge is a very normal thing in the female body. Discharge is a sign that your cervix, your vagina, your vaginal microbiome, everything is working together to keep bad things out. It is just a natural substance that the vagina and the cervix produces to protect you. So don't get icked out by your discharge. The only time you should be concerned is if your discharge smells, if your discharge is like super chunky and maybe even discolored, if it's yellow, if it's green, if it's like a foul look and a foul odor, then you should be concerned. But discharge every day is totally normal, whether it's maybe whitish, clearish, off-white. Don't panic, especially if you're not having obvious like rawness, burning, itching, odor. It's okay. Discharge is normal. We've been made out to think that it's like something bad. Discharge is okay, and it is normal to have it every day. Just make sure that it's healthy discharge. Next question says, can pregnancy or birth control cause BV or yeast infections? And yes, we just talked about this in one of the other questions. Pregnancy in particular calls for estrogen to rise, and estrogen can actually feed yeast infections, and yeast in particular, candida. So pregnant women are more susceptible to yeast infections than non-pregnant women, and birth control can have a similar effect, especially if you are on combination birth control where you are taking an estrogen progesterone birth control. This can feed yeast infections and cause yeast infections. So both of them can, because they are shifting your hormones, and your hormones play a crucial role in the vaginal microbiome and vaginal infections. And just very briefly, estrogen is responsible for producing on the epithelium, the vaginal tissue, glycogen. And glycogen is a polysaccharide, which is like an energy source for good bacteria in the vagina. So this is good. We want healthy, balanced estrogen. In fact, the reason why menopausal women and postpartum women can struggle with vaginal dryness, UTIs, bacterial vaginosis is more specifically because they're losing good bacteria because their estrogen is low. So after pregnancy, your estrogen dips. After pregnancy, this can now cause dryness. There's all these other hormonal changes during menopause. Your estrogen dips. If you have PCOS, a lot of women with PCOS actually have low estrogen. This can also make you lose the good bacteria in the vagina. So low estrogen conditions can make you lose good bacteria in the vagina. And alternatively, high estrogen conditions can make you struggle with yeast infections more often than the average person. So it's really important to understand your hormones. And this isn't a one size fits all. It's possible it can make you are more likely if you are on birth control or if you are pregnant, but it's not a guarantee. Not everybody will struggle with a yeast infection while they are pregnant. Number 11 says, do vaginal probiotics really go to the vagina? Yes, they do, if they are made correctly. So oral probiotics need to be able to survive the stomach's acid. If they can't survive the stomach's acid, they won't make it to the small and large intestine. That's where you want them to go, the intestines. They have to be able to make it to the intestines. But a lot of the probiotics on the market don't actually make it to the intestines because within seconds of reaching the stomach and the stomach's acid, they die off. So a good probiotic, like with Meraki Co.'s probiotics, ours are made with bioengineering technology that protects the strain. So it's not even, we don't have a fancy schmancy capsule. We have a fancy strain. Our strains are bioengineered to be able to survive very high pH levels and very low pH levels, basically guaranteeing to you that they are going to survive the bile acid, the stomach's acid. They are going to survive the entire journey throughout the GI tract, because they're capable of withstanding all kinds of pH levels. And that's what's key. So once they survive all of the stomach acid and bile solution, in the bile salts, what happens is they populate in the intestines, and that's what you want. And they can seed from the rectum to the butthole to the vagina. Essentially, your rectal mucosa ascends to the vaginal mucosa. And more, there's research that's highlighting translocation internally from the gut to the bladder, for example. But right now, what we do know is that actual migration between the butthole and the vagina. So the probiotics probiotics seed back and forth, almost like floss between your butthole and your vagina, but they got to make it to the butthole. And most of them don't, but ours do. Next question, should I use Monistat or just wait it out until... Next question says, should I use Monistat or just wait it out if my symptoms are mild? My advice is get treated. The longer you leave an infection untreated, it's possible it could form a biofilm and it can become more stubborn. And that's what we don't want. We don't want a stubborn infection. So if you are having a mild infection or even mild symptoms, confirm that you have a yeast infection, because you don't want to start over treating, right? You don't want to treat an infection that's not there, because you can make any little bit of yeast that's present, you can make it resistant to treatment by trying to treat it when there's no need to treat it. So make sure, confirm that you actually have this infection, because a lot of people actually mix up. Like, I think there was a study that came out for 2023 that like a large amount of people who had BV in quotations, they actually were misdiagnosed with BV, but actually have a yeast infection. That's just because it's easy to mix it up, especially nowadays. You go on Google and it's always like, these are the concrete symptoms of BV and yeast infections. And it's not true. Like, don't take those symptom quiz and go online, and it's not a one size fits all. Confirm medically through a swab that you have a yeast infection or BV before you start treating. But if your symptoms are mild, that's my advice. Like, make sure you have a yeast infection first, but I wouldn't just like ignore the yeast infection, because you obviously don't want it to get smarter and start forming biofilms and become more stubborn. Next question says, why do I get infections right before my period? This is the classic hormone situation, because right before your period, your estrogen dips, and estrogen dipping is what is directly responsible for losing good bacteria in the vagina. And again, when you lose this good bacteria in the vagina, you are more susceptible to bacterial vaginosis, yeast infections, and UTIs right before your period, which is why so many of you struggle with these infections around the time of your period. Next question, what's the best time of the day to take the probiotics? I always suggest either morning or night. You could do it on an empty stomach or with food. It doesn't matter, whatever you're comfortable with. I go back and forth. So when I am taking with Harmony, my probiotics with Harmony, I will take them at night. I like taking them at bedtime, especially because they're hormone supporting. So I like to take it at night. But when I am taking with Clarity, for example, I take them in the morning and I take it on an empty stomach. I have no trouble taking supplements on an empty stomach, except for ones that are like absolutely recommended to eat with food. My supplements like probiotics, I personally have no issue taking it on an empty stomach. Same with Gut Revival and even Thrive. But in terms of our probiotics, I always recommend morning. Typically, if you're taking with Harmony, I would suggest at night, but you could also take with Harmony in the morning with or without food. Totally up to you and what your tolerance is. Can I take 2 different probiotics at the same time? This is a great question. My advice is probably you don't need to, especially if you're taking a good quality one like ours. You don't need to double it up with something else. It should suffice as a single standing probiotic. Now, the only time I really recommend that maybe you could take our probiotic with something else is if there's a probiotic strain. For example, Saccharomyces boulardii is such a good probiotic for the gut. It's actually in our Gut Revival powder, but if you took, let's say, Saccharomyces boulardii capsules, this is a bacteria that's so good for the gut, but it's not really colonizing the vagina, but you want to get it in your gut. You can take our probiotics alongside a probiotic that has Saccharomyces boulardii so that you're adding extra support to the gut and extra support to the vagina with ours. So that would be the only time if it's like a targeted strain that you're really trying to support a targeted organ or a targeted body part, then you can maybe combine. But for the most part, our probiotics, because you take them orally, they will support your gut microbiome and they will support the vaginal microbiome. So you don't necessarily need to take or search for another probiotic formulation. Does BV mean that your partner is cheating? The answer is no. It doesn't mean your partner is cheating. I know that this is something that a lot of women struggle with, especially with things on the internet like telling you that your partner's cheating on you if you get BV, or telling you that your body's rejecting your partner's dirty, all of these things. it doesn't mean that your partner's cheating on you. What it could mean is that your partner and you are sharing microbial loads, and that is normal to share bacteria. You share bacteria when you kiss your partner. If you are tonguing somebody down, you are sharing bacteria. And guess what? There's bacteria in our mouth. There's bacteria that causes dental issues, gingivitis. There's bacteria that causes dental problems, and people are swapping spit all the time and passing bacteria from one another. The key here is that normally when you're passing bacteria between each other, if your oral microbiome is healthy, then 9 times out of 10, nothing's going to happen. Your teeth aren't going to fall out from kissing someone, even if they have bad bacteria in their mouth. So the same may apply if you have a new partner. If your vaginal microbiome is healthy and optimal and it has a dominating presence of lactobacillus, this good bacteria, it likely will keep any bad bacteria at bay and prevent it from like overgrowing and causing a true problem. However, if you are in a monogamous relationship and you've been with your partner for a really long time and then suddenly you get BV out of nowhere and you didn't really know that you had BV and you guys were having sex, it's possible that this high microbial load of bacterial vaginosis pathogens has now been placed on your partner's genitalia. And so even if you got treated, it could be reinserted back into the vagina. But we don't have too much evidence that this happens, because what we do know is, for the most part, when it comes to the male genitalia, BV pathogens either last for up to like 3 days on the male genitalia, or like they die off immediately. They don't. Anaerobic bacteria has a specific type of condition that it wants to survive and thrive. And the male genitalia just is not that. It's an external part that doesn't have the same warmth, the same moisture that these pathogens want. And so most times research tells us that Gardnerella, for example, which is the main pathogen that causes BV, this pathogen literally dies off in like 24 hours and does not survive for more than 3 days on the penis. And so for that reason, it's very, 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 very unlikely that the partner is like carrying it for weeks and days. Now, if you're having sex every day, you could be swapping it to this person. But if you abstain from sex for the 7 days that you are on treatment, the theory is that this should help. But there is some research showing that men could be reinfecting their partner if they don't get treated. But the studies that have been done never confirmed or swabbed the man's penis to confirm that they're carrying Gardnerella, which I think is super important. Like, we need to confirm that they're carriers, because right now all of the research shows us that men, the penis doesn't harbor for days this pathogen. Like, yes, it could be on their penis immediately after sex because you're transferring and sharing microbial loads, but it's not something that lasts for days or weeks that could reinfect the partner. So we just need more studies about this. It's something that's emerging, but it doesn't mean that your partner's cheating on you. There are so many things that can make you lose the good bacteria in your vagina, which in turn can cause the overgrowth of bad bacteria. And this overgrowth of bad bacteria can be a struggle for intimacy and during your relationship. So I wouldn't jump the gun and assume that your partner's cheating on you, because it's not an STI. It's not something that a man will catch from another woman and then go and insert it into you. It doesn't work in the same way, especially because these pathogens are commensal, meaning that they already live in the vagina. So the focus should always be to support your vaginal microbiome and make sure it's healthy, because if your vagina did come into contact with Gardnerella, it should be able to fight it off if you are feeding your vagina good bacteria. Last question, is it okay to take probiotics while pregnant or breastfeeding? Generally, probiotics are considered safe while pregnant and breastfeeding. However, with ours in particular, with Clarity, I would say is safe enough. Make sure that you double check with your provider, because they know your history, they know your medical conditions. Double check with your provider always, always, always. But I would say that with Clarity is safe to take during breastfeeding and during pregnancy. With Harmony is the one that you want to err on the side of caution because there's ashwagandha inside of it, which is not recommended for either people who are pregnant or people who are breastfeeding. So generally, just probiotics in general, good bacteria is totally fine during pregnancy and breastfeeding. It is the additional ingredients in With Harmony that I would err on the side of caution, which is why With Clarity is definitely the safer one, because the additional ingredients inside of With Clarity is just cranberry and vitamin D. So nothing that's unsafe. But those were amazing questions, guys. You guys have such amazing questions and I love it. So I'm really glad that I got to answer all of these for you guys. Thank you so much for literally tuning in, sending all these questions, supporting the podcast and supporting the Instagram page, the TikTok page. I love you guys so much. I'm so grateful to have you guys and be a source of knowledge for you guys. I love doing these and I hope I could do another Q&A really soon. If you didn't get your question answered, don't worry because we're going to be doing more of these. But I love you guys so much and I will see you in the next one. Take care, guys. Bye.